Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, May 1st, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the state of the 2024 presidential election. Now, before this video kicks off, I want to first start by saying I saw some of the most recent comments on my video back at the end of March where I made an election prediction around a month and 2 days ago where there was some concern about the predictions that I was putting out. My prediction back in March had predicted that Donald Trump would win the election, and it seems to serve in direct contrast with some of the videos I've been putting out that have been generally talking about how the Biden campaign has in fact seen a resurgence in support in some of these battleground states, an uptick in the national polling data, an increase in fundraising efforts. And while all of those things I do absolutely believe to be true and report on, I think, in my way to be less partisan, nonpartisan, whatever term you want to use here, I recognize that I have an inherent bias when it comes down to videos like these. I really don't think anyone can be truly nonpartisan or truly unbiased, but can certainly, try to achieve that, and that's what I try to do here. But moving on from that point, these predictions here are not meant to be predictions for the November election, but rather if the election was held today. That's why the videos are titled the 2024 presidential election as of May 1st, 2024, because it's an interesting thing to look at. It's a snapshot in time. It's a snapshot of where the current American public sentiment is in these battleground states, in these safe states, regardless of where you're looking at. This is what I think if Americans were to go to the ballot box today and we went through a full day of, voting from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., this is what the map would look like. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we look at maps like these, because right now the fundamental facts are Donald Trump is performing better in the polls, but almost every other predictive factor shows Joe Biden doing well. So it's a very interesting time to look at election data, to look at election predictions like these. And the reason why I do them every month and what will be every 2 weeks as we get closer to the election cycle is because they provide these snapshots in time where we can track to see, okay, where was public sentiment 6 months ago? What happened between, August and October? What happened between January and March? Things like that are really important to me, and I think they're important to a lot of people, and so that's where we are with those. With that being said, forgive me for 2 minutes of, potentially wasted time on a topic like that if you don't really care for it, but we're going to get right into this election prediction. This electoral map here is very similar to the one that we worked with in the last presidential election. The only difference is that after redistricting and new census data, some states have gained and lost electoral votes. But overall, there shouldn't be a fundamental advantage gained for Democrats or Republicans when it comes down to a map like this one. And so what we're looking at is a very similar electoral map, not only in terms of electoral count, but in terms of how many of these states are going to go. I always kick off my map by characterizing states that we determine to be safe red or safe blue, essentially states that are going to be decided by a margin of victory of 15 points or higher, which essentially renders them unable to be won by the opposition party. States like Illinois and California and New York just simply aren't going to be won by Republicans, and that's just the way it is. No matter how much Joe Biden gaffes or makes mistakes or scandals that arise, whatever it might be, fundamentally, these states are going to vote blue. The hyperpolarization that we've seen across the country also seems to suggest that it doesn't matter who is running on the Democratic ticket. It could be Joe Biden, it could be Kamala Harris, it could be anyone, and that Democrat would win these states. And the same can be said for Republicans in many other parts of the country as well. And so we start off with a lot of states on the East and West Coast here characterized as Democratic states, safe Democratic states. Republicans have no shot at victory here, and the margins are expected to be very, very strong for the incumbent president. Now, for Donald Trump, however, he has his own fair share of safe states. From the heart of middle of America to the deep south here, you're finding that many of these states are going to be very strong for the former president, and that really isn't going to change much between now and November. When you look at some of these states, some of these districts that are going red, going blue, just know that neither party is really going to be investing in them between now and November, which means they're probably going to even get further in the advantage for the party that they are currently set to win by, that is currently set to win it. And so that brings us to Republicans at 125 electoral votes, Democrats at 181. And so this is pretty much the baseline, the simplest amount of support that we could see for either side of the aisle. And so Democrats at initial glance might seem to have the upper hand, but I promise you, after our next set of characterizations, they roughly equalize because Republicans have had their eyes on the prize in some of these very large states like Texas and Florida, and have honestly built up a strong enough campaign for us to genuinely see exactly how Democrats and Republicans, exactly why Republicans are going to do well in these states. And so with 232 remaining electoral votes, let's move into what we call likely states. States that are probably going to vote for Trump, not probably, but likely to vote for Trump. We could predict this out months in advance here, and the margins of victory are a little bit smaller and the safe characterization, this means that these are states that are going to go to Trump or Biden by 5 to 15 percentage points. And so it sort of narrows down the scope of some of these states. They're going to receive some attention. They're going to be of some importance, but we generally know how they're going to go. And we would be surprised, not shocked would be for a safe state, but surprised if they were to go a different direction. And so likely states are always very interesting because at some points in time, we actually have seen likely states that would otherwise be, expected to go one way, go to the opposition party. But right now we feel comfortable enough to say that if we were to put money on it, we'd say that these parties win them based on how we characterize them, but it wouldn't be entirely out of the realm of possibility that Democrats or Republicans win a likely red or blue state respectively, but it would be for these safe states. And so we'll kick this off with a very, very large state, the state of Florida here, which is actually going to be shifting quite significantly to the right given the last election. In 2020, President Trump won the state by 3.3%. In 2016, he won it by 1.3%. And so Florida went from being a state that Republicans won narrowly to more, and now even further, largely due to an influx of hundreds of thousands of conservatives during the COVID-19 pandemic, a shift in support amongst minority groups, specifically Cuban Americans, just generally Hispanic, Latino voters in Miami-Dade County, in Broward County, in specific parts of the state the Democrats relied on for victories here. They haven't won a statewide race, might I add, since the 2012 presidential and Senate election there, at least a nationalized race, even governor race too. Republicans have been doing quite well in the state of Florida, to say the least. And now with this influx of, again, hundreds of thousands of conservative voters here that might have come from other swing states or other parts of the country, Florida has now become a likely red state. Moving over to the state of Texas, a state that Donald Trump won by 5.6% in the last election here, he's probably going to roughly similar, maybe win by 6 or 7 points. Again, it is this bleeding amongst Latino and Hispanic voters here that could do some serious damage to the president of the United States, especially in a state like Texas, especially in a state like Florida. And ultimately speaking, we haven't seen that much shift from the 2020 election overwhelmingly in favor of President Biden. If anything, President Biden was to win in a map like this one, it would be by a smaller margin than he did in 2020. And so while that may be unorthodox, there's only 2 presidents who have ever done that. Coincidentally, President Obama was one of them, Woodrow Wilson was the other. It would be shocking to say historically, in historical context, incumbent presidents typically win by more, but given some of the more recent trends we've been seeing, Texas and Florida are probably not going to be shifting blue, at least in this election. And so that already brings the Republican Party to 195, the Democrats to 181. Republicans also have Maine's 2nd congressional district here. This is a congressional district that Republicans have done recently well in 2016 and 2020. Donald Trump is being the first Republican to actually win this district when the rest of the state votes blue. And so Maine's 2nd is pretty solidly Republican right now. I'd say it's not a solid district. Trump's probably going to win it by anywhere from 8 to 9 to 10 points here, but it's likely red. And that brings the state overall to not being actually a safe blue state as it once was back in 2008 or 2012. He also has the states of Iowa and Ohio joining the ranks as likely red states. You may remember these states for being Obama states in 2008 and 2012, and then switching over significantly in 2016 and maintaining those margins in 2020. Donald Trump has tapped into a very significant portion of the electorate in Iowa and Ohio that voted for Obama twice, and then voted for Trump twice, and now will vote for him a 3rd time. His grip here has also extended to now benefiting Republicans, people like Joni Ernst, people across the state, Kim Reynolds, the governor there. Ultimately, Iowa and Ohio have become significantly more conservative in the Trump era. Democrats have had not much luck, even with the most stellar of candidates and the weakest of GOP candidates here. The only benefit, I think, for President Biden that actually might make Ohio narrower than Iowa, which might be surprising given that in 2008 and 2012, when Biden was also on the ballot with Obama, Iowa was the driving state for the left, and Ohio was just begrudgingly going along by 2 or 3 points here. Now it's sort of interesting, because Ohio seems to be the best performing now for Democrats. It was in 2020. It probably will be again in 2024 because Senator Sherrod Brown, a popular Democratic incumbent, is running for re-election, and I think he will marginally help Joe Biden, but not enough to move this state outside of the likely Republican column. And so now Republicans are in the lead at 219, and Democrats remain at 181. But Democrats, of course, have their own likely blue states. States like Colorado and New Mexico and Virginia and New Hampshire and Minnesota and Nebraska's 2nd district and Maine at large here, which altogether bring the Democrats to 226 back in the advantage over the GOP. And to give a quick spiel for each of these states, New Hampshire voted very similarly back in 2020. Almost all of the data seems to suggest that New Hampshire just simply is not narrowing up here. A lot of the voters here very content with their choices in 2020, probably will be again in 2024. Virginia was won by 10 in the last election. Minnesota was won by 7. Colorado by 14. New Mexico by 10 here. I just don't see as much bleeding enough on the Democratic side to say that these states really narrowed down. They're within a wide range of support for the Democratic Party from 2020, and even in 2016, Democrats won all 5 of these states that we just characterized, and so I don't see a reason that Joe Biden should lose it in 2024. There isn't enough lost support across these very important states here that I could say, reasonably speaking, Joe Biden is going to see these states won by less than 5 percentage points. I think he's absolutely going to win all of them. You know that from the baseline, but I think he even wins all of them by more than 5 points. And so that brings us down to 93 toss-up electoral votes, and this is really where the money, where the energy, where really everything is going to be poured into for this election cycle, because it is 93 electoral votes that will truly determine the future of our country. And so Republicans and Democrats have been fighting really hard for these states, not only on the presidential, but even in the 2022 midterms, in special elections between 2020 and 2024. These are the states that are the priority, and they know that. They know that these are going to be the ones where Democrats and Republicans are just simply going to be spending nearly all of their time here. And what's also important to note is that Democrats also have important Senate races happening in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. There are 5 Democratic incumbents in these states that are running for re-election to the United States Senate, or in some cases, not 5 Democratic incumbents, actually 4 across the states. 3. Sorry, Debbie Stabenow is retiring, but Democrats are fighting for that race and have a presumptive nominee there. And then also in the state of Arizona, a presumptive nominee, Ruben Gallego, an incumbent U.S. House representative. Elisa Slotkin is the one in Michigan, also an incumbent U.S. House representative here. So 93 electoral votes. Very, very interesting. Democrats and Republicans are going to be fighting hard for these states, but not just for the presidential, also for the important Senate races that are following down the ballot. And so where I start off here are the states that I am the most comfortable characterizing, states that we determine to be lean red or lean blue, meaning they're being decided by margins between 1 and 5 percentage points. And so there actually are 2 states on this map here that I could say, 3 states reasonably, that I could say are going to go to these political parties by a lean margin. And we'll start off with the state of North Carolina, a state that hasn't voted blue since 2008, and then before then, going all the way back, I believe, to Jimmy Carter, if not him, then Lyndon B. Johnson. North Carolina is a state the Democrats have consistently fought tirelessly for. They have went time and time again to Senate races, House races, presidential races. The only ones they really get luck in is the governor races. Now, the governor's race here is doing very well for Democrats. I think Josh Stein is going to help President Biden, and I think it's going to bring him close to the finish line, closer even than Hillary Clinton got in 2016. But I think it's going to be a margin very similar to what we saw in 2020. Trump ends up winning the state by roughly 1 to 2 points here, and it seems so far out of reach, but was so within reach during the election season. North Carolina is an interesting one, though, because Democrats, again, have won the governor's race here and also just have narrowed up the races. In 2022, they were supposed to lose by 6 or 7 points. They only ended up losing by roughly 3 points. They've gotten lucky in state Supreme Court elections. And so North Carolina, for now, I'd say, is a state that Republicans are going to win. Trump is going to win by a lean margin, but I'd be very interested to see where it pans out over the next couple of months. Georgia is another state that I would say moves over into the lean Republican column. I've wavered back and forth, pretty much always had it in the Trump column more recently, but wavered back and forth between tilt red, lean red, whatever it might be, because at different points in time, the state did swing in one direction versus the other. But for right now, I'd say Georgia is a state that is lean Republican. I think North Carolina is also another state that I would say is lean Republican. And together, those 32 electoral votes bring Donald Trump's chances at victory pretty, much higher, and also brings his electoral total to 251 electoral votes, which leaves us with 61 remaining electoral votes to determine, again, the future of the country and the future, of course, for these presidential campaigns. Now, Democrats have their own lean state. They have the state of Pennsylvania that I would say is probably the most likely to vote blue out of any of the Rust Belt states. I think they have been very much more in favor of Joe Biden compared to other battleground states. Other polls that we have seen, the estimations even from political pundits here, the Rust Belt seems to be the most favorable to Joe Biden. And they even were back in 2020. For instance, Joe Biden was supposed to win Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, as well as Georgia and Arizona. But what's interesting is that the polls had suggested a very similar thing to what happened on Election Day. The 3 Rust Belt states were more Democratic than Arizona and Georgia. For context, Arizona and Georgia were won by less than 0.3% each, Wisconsin was won by 0.6. Michigan was won by 2.8. And Pennsylvania was won by 1.1. And so these states here, of course, were still close, but larger in the lead for the Democrats. Pennsylvania, uniquely enough, has been a very strong state for President Biden. While Donald Trump does have a minor advantage in the polling data right now, Joe Biden has had a lead here for a lot longer than he did in many of the other states. Not to mention, too, that Pennsylvania just seems to not be changing too heavily from 2020. A lot of the data that we're seeing here is either showing Trump or Biden ahead, but fundamentally, the state does not seem to be too changed. Too many more undecided voters here, and there is a Senate race where Bob Casey, the incumbent Democrat, is expected to clear his Republican opponent. Any help really would do a number for Joe Biden, and I think he's going to get enough to push him over the finish line. And so that brings Democrats, it brings Joe Biden to 245 electoral votes, Republicans to 251. As we look across these states, I will say the remaining states are going to be characterized by what we like to use and call a tilt margin. These are states that are decided by less than 1 percentage point, which means they truly could go either way. And I think that's really where we are in this election here. Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada are the states that are probably going to be the most targeted, the most important. And while there are, of course, these 7 states that are at large, the key and crucial battleground states, it is these 4 that will determine the presidency pretty much single-handedly. The same way that Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin did back in 2020, it's very similar that all of these will do the exact same thing. And so as we look at them, in these 42 toss-up electoral votes, we're going to first start off by characterizing the states that we determine to be tilt Republican. That means the state of Michigan. Now, Michigan is a unique state. Michigan is a state that I have taken a look at in so many different contexts, from the context of the Arab American voter, from the context of college voters, from the context of rural Michigan voters. Michigan has so many different bases here. I think Vox actually did a video recently saying that Michigan was the most comparable state to the entire country in terms of political ideology, in terms of political voting history, in terms of demographics. Michigan has been pretty much with the winning party for a while now, but not only that, has become recently more indicative of the rest of the country. And so I think Michigan right now, with a decreased sense of enthusiasm around campuses like Ann Arbor, with U of M and Michigan State, combined with the decreased expected vote share from the Detroit, Dearborn area, whether it's Arab American voters that they're bleeding at, Black American voters that are bleeding here. I think you're seeing that in the state of Michigan, Democrats are not doing super well. I actually believe this to be true, despite Michigan being the best state for both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in 2016 and 2020, is that Pennsylvania is more likely to vote blue. Simply because the state of Michigan has a unique base for Democrats that has been uniquely lost. Something that we have not seen in states like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania that make Michigan more likely to vote red, not because these voters are flipping to Donald Trump, but because many of them are not voting for President Biden. And thus, it ultimately hurts his candidacy. And so Michigan, 15 electoral votes in the Republican column, but I think Democrats hold on to Wisconsin. Similar to Pennsylvania, a Rust Belt state that has been pretty strong for the incumbent president and surprisingly enough, has not been shifting further and further right. Maybe the numbers are better for Trump than they were in 2020, but fundamentally, I think based on what we've seen in 2022, what we've seen in special elections, and just generally speaking, President Biden's performance in the Rust Belt region in 2020, I think Wisconsin maintains itself today as a tilt blue state, bringing Joe Biden's numbers up to 255. Donald Trump remains at 266. The next state I'm going to characterize actually might throw people for a loop. It is the state of Arizona, which has been very competitive in the past few election cycles. It has always mattered for Democrats, Republicans since 2016, even. When Donald Trump won the state by 3.5%, it really became a state that was at the center focus for both parties. In 2018, Kyrsten Sinema won the Senate race there, and a big surprise for Republicans. In 2020, Joe Biden flipped the state for the first time since 96. This time around, I think in contrast with some of my most recent predictions, Arizona is in the tilt blue column. And I know some people might be shocked by that. How do we get to a point right now where Arizona is a state that, despite the rest of the country, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan being examples, has shifted right wing, have moved over from what were, Biden states in 2020 or narrowly Trump states in 2020 to now being more conservative. And yet Arizona doesn't seem to shift at all. To be fair, Donald Trump won the state in 2016 by 3.5. Joe Biden only won the state by 0.3. And so while I think the argument on previous margin is fair, Arizona has seen an influx in its Phoenix metro area across the state that have really boosted the Democratic Party's chances of victory. Not to mention this, a factor here that I think will really only matter in Arizona But the abortion rights amendment that is now getting on the ballot for Democrats here is going to help tremendously. Not to mention a Senate race that is going to be very strong for the Democratic Party. Arizona fundamentally is going to be a state that you are going to see so many other issues besides the presidential really matter to voters here. And so with that slight nudge, when it comes down to an abortion referendum being on the ballot, in addition to the slight nudge of somebody like Kari Lake being a Republican representative on the ballot there, running for the United States Senate, I think Joe Biden has a higher chance of victory than any of us are even expecting, in significant contrast with some of the polling data that shows him losing by 5 points across the state. I think Arizona is a sleeper Democratic state, and this abortion referendum really only confirms that suspicion. It's going to be narrow. It's going to be less than 1%, but I truly believe that Joe Biden wins the state of Arizona should the election be held today, assuming that abortion rights amendment is on the ballot, and I think it drives a lot more turnout than I think we expect, because we saw it happen in 2022. We've seen it happen even in, off elections, primary elections like the ones we've seen in Kansas in 2023, like we saw in Ohio with Ohio Issue 1. I mean, there are a lot of things here that I think the Democratic Party knows how to do well, and abortion is one of them, and I think uniquely in Arizona, it helps the Democratic Party. And so the final state we have to characterize is the state of Nevada. 6 electoral votes that are make-or-breaking this presidential election. And to call it bluntly, I think Donald Trump wins Nevada. I know it might be surprising to see Nevada and Arizona vote differently. Believe me, if I saw this map back in 2020, I probably would have laughed at myself. How is Michigan red, Nevada red, but Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Arizona blue? But that's where we are. This electoral map here is a very weird one. There are different bases and different reasons to believe that Joe Biden and Donald Trump would do well in their respective states from the last election. Joe Biden, I think, has lost support in the state of Nevada. He didn't improve off Hillary Clinton's margin, and what we saw with Joe Lombardo and we saw with Steve Sisolak in 2022 is that unpopular Democratic incumbents sometimes don't make the cut. Even though Nevada historically has voted blue, 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 this election, there are a combining number of factors here that I think genuinely could help Donald Trump and I think put him narrowly over the finish line, which brings us to our final electoral vote map here of 272 to 266. It's a very close race, and the 4 states that are make or breaking it are Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada, and they matter so much. Democrats and Republicans will likely find these to be the core 4 that will determine the future of this country, the future of presidential elections, amongst the very important swing state 7, whatever you want to call it. But these states here are amongst the most important and are the closest here, which means I could see in any reality how Michigan ends up blue, but Arizona ends up red, or Nevada ends up blue, but Wisconsin ends up red. Our maps here are not meant to be, 100% perfect. They're meant to be snapshots in time of where we are today as a country, and I genuinely think this is where we are. I do believe if the election was held today, that Donald Trump would win a second term. I equally believe that the map will look very different this coming November, which is why it's so important to track it today so we can see how the times have changed the map. And in a way, the map has changed the times. So final map here, Donald Trump 272 electoral votes, Joe Biden 266. The narrowest Trump victory yet. A very interesting one with a fascinating electoral map. You're free to agree or disagree in the comment section down below. I'd love to see some of your guys' thoughts on this. But for me, this is where I'm at today as of May 1st, 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist from my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.